Today we're going to be talking about how tall you need to be as a winger, playing lock and improving game awareness. Welcome to episode 58 of Run It Straight. Okay, first question. Is 5'7" or 170 centimetres an okay height for a winger in under 15s? Look, in under 15s, yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Yep.
But moving forward, probably not so much.
Yeah.
Look, it really depends on how much extra growth you've got. You know, a lot of boys typically will stop growing somewhere between 16 and 18 years of age. And I'd say probably more than half, maybe 60% of the boys that we work with, when we test their height at 16, it doesn't really get much taller than that. They don't get much higher. About 40% probably do keep growing. One of the best ways to judge would be, you know, have a look at your dad, have a look at any uncles, brothers, grandfathers on both sides, get an average height for them. That will give you an idea. You, Cal, are quite tall.
Yes.
Your dad's tall.
He's very tall.
And your brother's pretty tall. So
Yeah.
it's usually a good indicator. Obviously, you need to look at mum's side and dad's side as well. So uncles on both sides, grandfathers on both sides. Next thing I would look at is, as a kid, at what age did you start going through puberty? Because you're going to get maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years where you might be having some considerable growth spurt. And, you know, there's some kids who they might start at 12, whereas other kids who don't start until 15. So if you start at 12, by 16 you might be pretty much done. But if you're not starting until 15, you might keep growing until 18, 19. Also, something that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is, you said big enough to play wing, but is that like big enough for what? Like if you're fast, if you can tackle, you've got good hands, then you're good enough to play wing regardless. Who cares, right? Like it's you know, there's one old saying is, if you're good enough, then you're big enough, right? But I guess what we're talking about here when we're, you know, analysing, you know, all your relatives and when you started going through puberty and height maxes and things like that, is if you want to make junior rep sides, that's a completely different story. If anyone wants to play rugby league, who cares? It doesn't matter. You can, there's short wingers, there's tall wingers, you can make that work. But if you're looking at rep sides, then height is definitely important.
Yeah. But in saying that though, you know, wing is probably the one position where the height does vary from, you know, what teams look for. You know, a couple examples here. You've got on the extreme end, Jason Saab's almost 2 meters tall. I think he's 199. But then you have Brian To'o, who's just on 6 foot at 183.
Yep.
So you know, that's 6 inches different.
183 is still 183.
It's still 183.
Oh yeah,
there's a massive span.
There's like a kind of a minimum you kind of got to push to get to.
So at least 6 foot. You know, obviously by the time you finish developing and everything like that. But again, for 15, 5'7", that's fine.
That's,
15.
That's fine. But like we said, it's you know, it's very hard without knowing how tall everyone else is, and at where you are in your growth stage. But again, like we said, play footy, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And you can be a really good footballer, but if you're looking at reps, that can be a little bit of a
100%
question.
100%.
Next one, how do I improve as a lock / second rower, age 12, height 5'3", weight 58 kilos? Look, I always would like to start with summing up the role. So defensively, defending aggressively, both in the middle and on edge, making strong tackles. Look, I'm talking more from a second row point of view here. You know, you're helping slower middle forwards on your inside, you're protecting your smaller halves on the outside, running hard lines in attack, you know, hitting gaps, hitting leads, running at smaller halves / centres, supporting ball runners, taking ugly hit ups sometimes when your middles might be having a little bit of a rest. If it could be like a kick reception, a kick return, there might be a couple of scoots and then maybe 1 or 2 of the second rows get back to take a hit up. Applying kick pressure, all of these things, yes?
Yeah, 100%.
Need to be strong, good endurance and decent footwork, which is going to help you on both sides of the ball. But obviously he's 12, so he either plays under 12s or under 13s.
Yes.
Start with defence. You know, in all of junior rugby league, in almost every position, the number one thing everyone needs to be able to do is tackle. Okay, so work on that first. Get competent and confident with your tackle techniques. So whether they're faster kids that are putting a bit of footwork on it, maybe you do end up getting some lower cutting tackles against them, or they're bigger kids you can put shots on. You need to be able to tackle. That's number one. Any coach coaching those age groups, they're confident enough to stick a player in a position if they know they can hold their place in the line.
100%.
Next, run the ball hard with the aim of accelerating into contact.
Yep.
It's common for kids at that age to get the ball and sort of crab sideways, not looking for a gap, not necessarily wanting to run into the contact. But when you do come across a kid who they'll take the ball off a half or off the hooker and they just throw their body into the line, it's really, really valuable.
Yep.
So run hard with the aim of accelerating into that contact and then work on your fitness, which allows you to do those other two things really well.
Exactly. And lock and second row, they're also two different positions on the field, right? So as Joe said, second row, you're a little bit wider, helping your backs out, helping the middles out. But lock these days, you're almost looking at a third, 5/8, depending on the team you're playing in, or an extra middle. So there are different skill sets, not vastly different, but they are a little bit different in terms of, a lock might be a bit more of a ball player, back row, you might be hitting an edge, really running, as Joe said, hard unders lines.
Yeah, it actually taps into the question that's coming up after this one, which is understanding what your role is.
Yeah.
And so you need to look at sometimes, and again, you're at that 12s, 13s where you've just gone from playing kids football and it's just starting to become international rules and it starts to resemble a lot more sort of what you see on TV in the NRL.
Yep.
But you need to be clear about what your role is and what the coach wants you to be doing. Like Cal was saying, as a lock, you could be just a pivot point to move the ball out. When sides are having a shot out to the left or the right, it locks off and dig in and then pass out the back of a block play and it might hit the half or the 5/8 or the fullback or whatever it is. Or they might just be a slightly smaller middle front rower who takes hit-ups and makes a lot of tackles, but they might have a bit of a bigger engine than some of your standard middles.
100%.
Yeah.
But in saying that, as Joe said, rounding this off, as long as you tackle hard and run hard at that young of an age, you're pretty much set.
Yeah.
You will stand out.
That's run hard, tackle hard. Yeah. All right, next question. Hey guys, do you have any ideas or videos on how to improve my game awareness? Because that's a big thing my game lacks. So like we just mentioned in the last one, you need to know your role. A nice way to kind of think about it is if you're part of a big band, like orchestras that do, music for movies and things like that, they've got like a string section and they've got a percussion section and they've got a wind section. There's all these different areas who need to know their part. They don't need to know everyone else's part. They just need to know their part within that musical piece. So, they need to be skilled on their instrument. They need to be able to execute that skill under pressure, and they need to know when to do it. And this is the same thing for you. If you're looking to improve your game awareness, you need to know your role, which means you need to know the skills that you're going to need and when you need to execute them. So, question before, I was talking about, second rower lock. It was for a younger age, but still. So let's say second rower, your game awareness, one little aspect of it is we know you need to be running hard lines in attack, okay? Often, hitting gaps, running at opposing halves. A lot of times usually the second row is on a block play is always that lead, yeah?
Yep, 100%.
So when your side gets the ball, first listen to what the half is called for the set, whatever the structure is. Then don't think about everything else, just think about, okay, in this set structure, what is my role? Now, if you know that your side's going to be having a shot on the fourth tackle let's say you play on the right side of the field, right? Start getting yourself into position so that when you're going to run the lead, okay, when we have a shot, I run the lead on a block play, and sometimes the half might hit me, sometimes he might hit the sweeper and they go out the back, fullback, center, winger, whatever. But I've got to run my line 100% as though I'm getting the ball every single time. So while the middle's taking his hit-ups and they're working to whatever point on the field, you get to roughly where you need to be. You start to have a look, okay, there's the half. I'm going to start on his outside shoulder and then I'm going to run an unders line. I'm going to hit his inside shoulder. That's your game awareness this is what I need to be doing right now. What's my role within the team, within this set? It's to get there and get ready to run that line as hard as I can. If the half gives it to me, he gives it to me. Hands up, expecting it every single time. Now let's say that you're on the right and we're working across to the right before the shot's going to be to the left. So you're not going to have to run the lead this time, but maybe this is, okay, we're working to my side, so I might try and go in, take one of those ugly hit-ups and help the middles out. Or I might just back up the middles on both of their plays. So if they get a hand free, there's an offload. If they make a half break, they can get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So all you need to think about, which makes you much more game aware, it's sometimes people overthink it. I need to be knowing what's going on with this and what's going on with that. It's like, no. Understand what your role is.
Yep.
So if we're just using the second rower as an example, understand what a second rower's role is in both attack and in defence, and then make sure that you talk to the coach and see what he sees your role has been. He might have a different idea for, I don't know what the dynamics of your team are, but see what he wants from it. And there you know, okay, this is what my job is, this is what my role is. If I do these 4 things, I've done my job, I've made him happy. Like you're that piece in the band. You know, this is my piece of music, this is when I've got to play these notes. This is the same thing. You just do that. And if every single person in that side knows what their role is from their position and from the coach, and they execute on that, it's like a band playing a really good piece of music. Everyone hits the right notes at the right time. So I think sometimes game awareness, people can overthink that.
Yeah, 100%.
Because if you're a second rower, you don't need to know what the half's doing for, like, understand what's going through his brain. You don't need to understand what's going through. You just got to know your role and do it well. And if something screws up somewhere else and you've done your role, that's not on you.
It's not exactly right.
Yep. I don't know what else.
I find just watching rugby league more is a good way to get better understanding of game awareness. You know, say again, you're a second rower, watching someone like Hudson Young or Jacob Preston, seeing how they go about their business, you know, seeing how they line up, ready to take an unders line inside the half, or seeing how they D and how they shift out and when they release on a shift play and things like that. Getting used to watching players in your position and seeing what they do and certain traits they have, and you might watch a couple different types of players in that position. You know, for back rowers, we'll use as an example. You know, you've got at the Dogs, you've got Kickout, who's the big brawler, explosive back rower, but then you've got Jacob Preston on the other side, who's just hits the hard line, does his work, does it very well. You know, he probably might get picked for Origin this year. But again, they're 2 different types. So you look at both types, you go, okay, sweet, that's their role. And then you go, as Joe said, you go to your coach and you speak to him and go, all right, sweet, what do you want my role to do? And then that way you'll get a better understanding of what you're going to do on the field. And as Joe said, you know, if something happens down the line, a half drops the ball, winger drops it coming out of your own end on first tackle, so, you know, that's not on you, that's on them.
No, that's right. So the game awareness is going to come. You need to know what your role is. You need to know what the coach wants you to do. But knowing what your role is, a big part of that is when you watch games, don't just watch it as a spectator to be entertained.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, sit there and say, okay, what does the Roosters are playing? What does Angus Crichton do? What lines does he run? What does he do? Is he looking for second phase play? What does he do defensively? And then just, it's Manly. Look at Olakuatu. Look at Young. Just go through and look at all of those back rowers. Look at what they're doing. And particularly the sides that are really on tune, which the Bulldogs are killing it at the moment.
100%.
So have a good look at what they do. Melbourne's one of the best structured sides. Look at what their second rowers are doing, and just pay attention every set. And you might see, you know what, they're really not doing that many different things. There's like 3 things in attack and that's it. But they do it 100% and they do it all the time. And you watch, like I said, whenever there's a shot to the left or the right, that second rower is always running the lead, running the lead. And then maybe 1 out of 4, the half will hit him. But every time he's running it as though he's going to get the ball, because sometimes the half will see, there's a bit of a gap, or this player's pushed out, or the half's running unders line and he's pulled his opposing half, the hips have turned towards him a little, so he just makes that late decision to hit that guy.
Yeah, watching it live is even better too.
Yeah.
Watching it live, because sometimes the TV is just too
it's
focused on the ruck.
Where the action is, and you can't see what they're doing outside of that. We talk to boys in the academy all the time about that. It's like, if you go to one of these games where one of these top line second rowers are, and don't watch the game, watch the second rower, because you get to see them do a hit up. Now, what are they doing on the third tackle, and then the fourth tackle, and then the fifth tackle, and then defensively, what are they doing? Are they talking? Are they shifting? Are they pushing people in and out? Are they trying to work closer to the ruck themselves because they're a bigger body? So watch the guys who do this for a living, learn off them, which helps you to understand what your role is. Find out what the coach wants you to do, and just execute on that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's our last question.
That's the last one for this one.
What do you need to tell them?
Alrighty, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Click the notification bell. Please follow us on Instagram and comment anything on this video.
Yeah, ask any questions.
Ask any questions you have
about this, about what we've talked about here, or anything else.
Yep.
Like we always say, send DMs in Instagram. Yep. That's me answering all those questions every single time. It's not anyone else. It's not a bot or anything like that. Yep. But other than that, we will see you in the next one.